So if you were to get in a time machine, which you'll probably tell me doesn't exist because you're a physicist, but if you were to get in your TARDIS and travel back and meet Adam, was there a literal man named Adam that walked the earth and he had a wife named Chava, Eve? Do you believe that that was the case?
I think for certain there was, and there were other
Okay.
Homo sapiens sapiens around at the same time. He
Oh,
was the first Homo sapiens sapien to have a soul and a neshama. That's verse 26 and
oh,
verse 27
wow.
of Genesis chapter 1. Makes it very clear. This is from memory now, so anyone looking it up in the Bible, it's Genesis chapter 1, from verse 26. I hope you remember. God
Hmm.
says, let us make Adam, not us,
Hmm.
Adam. Let us
Hmm.
make. I'm emphasizing the verb now. Let us make Adam.
Hmm.
And the next sentence says, God created the Adam. The English misses that totally. The.
Hmm.
God, I say, Peggy Ketz pointed that out to me, a woman named Peggy. God said, let us make Adam. Making is a process verb. In Hebrew, it takes time and
Uh-huh.
stuff. And that's why it says for 6 days, the Lord, it's in the opening, God created the heavens and the earth. And then later in chapter 2, it says, for 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth. Made, Asiya, takes time and stuff. Creation does not. So, and Nehemia, stop me when if I'm blabbering away too much, please.
No, no, this is great.
Okay. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God says, let us make, and I'm emphasizing make Adam, stuff and time. The next sentence says, and God created the Adam. Well, if I got Adam made in verse 26, why do I have to create him in verse 27? Okay? Because the making is the
Mhm.
physical body, creation is something from absolute nothing, and
Mhm.
it brings whatever it brings into the world, it brings it in instantaneously. So something over time was made Adam, and it's Adam there. But the next sentence says God creates the Adam. The Hebrew has the in front. The Adam, et ha'adam, the Adam, and that creation can't be his body. Or it's mentioned in verse 26. That creation is the spiritual creation, the soul, because according to all ancient comments that I've read, and I have not read all ancient commentary by a long shot, but I've read a lot of it, and that all commentary says there was one physical creation, the opening sentence of the Bible. Okay, the next, all the other creations are spiritual. So so when God says in verse 27 of Genesis chapter 1, God creates the Adam, that's a spiritual creation. It changed a Homo sapien person into a Homo sapien human.
Wow.
That's the problem.
Wow. All right.
No,
So I want to
I'm
just,
not, Nehemia, I
yeah.
promise you, I'm not bending it any way. God forbid
No,
it.
I'm not saying you're bending it. I want the audience to understand because there's some subtleties here. So we have two Hebrew verbs, asa, ayin, sin, hey, and you're saying that's a process, that's to make, and there's bara, bet, resh, aleph, which is to create what we call ex nihilo, something out of nothing. And
Only God does creation. People can
all
do
right.
making.
So in
Okay.
verse 26, God said, let us make man. But then in verse 27, it says, and he created man, and
Now
that
let's use the word
creation was
Adam. Let
something
us
out of
make Adam.
nothing.
Let us say make Adam. He make Adam, and God creates the Adam.
The
Yeah.
Adam, Ha-Adam. Okay. So, okay. But it says, Zachar and Nekeva Barotam, he created them, male and
Yeah.
female.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it
Beautiful.
right
Yes.
here.
Great, isn't it? Yeah.
So, so,
He called their name Adam. No, Nehemiah,
yeah.
it's so beautiful. And he called their name Adam. That sentence
Mhm.
you just quoted ends, and he called their name Adam. We don't even know if that Adam verse in Genesis could have been Adam and Eve, because he called their
Well, it
name
says what male and female he created them. That's
exactly.
female as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
so. All right. If I could put in maybe layman's terms, and correct me if I'm wrong. So you're arguing that evolution took place. There was an Australopithecus afarensis, which evolved into, I don't know, into some later.
Use the word developed. If you skip out the word evolved, use the word developed.
Okay, developed into more advanced hominids, and then at one point God decided this particular, I hope hominid is the right word, this particular hominid I'm going to give a soul, and it's no longer going to be an animal, it's going to be a ha'adam, a human being. Is that what you're saying?
100%. And those hominids,
Okay, wow.
saying the Homo sapiens sapiens, they go back over 120,000 years. They look just like you and me. Had your brains. They invented farming 11,000 years ago, long before Adam. That takes brains.
But those were people who didn't have souls.
They were people. They weren't humans.
Okay. Do all humans today have souls?
Well, I live in the Middle East, so I have to question sometimes.
But joking aside, right? Meaning like you could say, well, Hamas isn't responsible for raping little boys and killing people because they're not human, right? But no, that's the atrocity of it. When a lion kills a person, nobody says what a immoral lion, because lions, that's what they do. Right? When a human kills another human, then it's because they have a soul that makes it so abominable.
Yeah, it makes them responsible. Yeah. Your description was 100% of what I was thinking. I thank you for making that statement. Yeah.
Okay, so all right, wow. So this is mind-blowing because here's what I find what Kent Hovind and other young Earth creationists teach. I find it very attractive because it has this very literalistic approach, right? All the scientists are wrong. The world is only 6,000 years old. And when you find a tree down in a coal mine, it's really a tree that couldn't be more than 6,000 years old. And at the same time, I feel like I have to do these mental gymnastics to make it work.
Yeah. It's very
yeah.
If you don't, no, I was just going to mention another person that is very much like yourself that I won't mention. And you probably know the name also. If I can turn off the speaker for a second, just tell you.
Or we'll edit it out. I have an editor here, just if you want to say it.
You know whose name is Zola Levitt? Do you remember? Did you ever know Zola Levitt?
He interviewed me once. Yeah, okay. I've met Zola Levitt.
We met. He read my book. He said it changed it. He said it changed his life because he'd always been a young Earth person and suddenly realized there's no reason for the gymnastics.
Would you mind leaving it in? I mean, it's up to you.
I don't mind. No, I was a good friend of his. I slept in his house.
Leaving in that you mentioned his name, if that's something that you're comfortable with.
No, I didn't know if you were comfortable with it.
Yeah, no, I think people would find that interesting. That look, I'm not a Christian, right? So if the part of the audience that's Christian is saying, well, it's just those Jews. Yeah. And the Jews, they don't take it literally, and that okay. And look, there's things that this is one of the things I asked Kent Hovind. I said, well, you'll agree there are things that aren't meant to be taken literally, and of course he agreed, right?
Yeah. I take it literally, but you have to understand the perspective of the Bible.
Right. I was once having a conversation with a flat earther, and I mean literally a flat earther. And there's a verse in Yeshayahu in Isaiah which says, "The heavens is his throne and the earth is his footstool." And this flat earther told me that's literally true. God sits in a really big chair with his feet on. I'm like, okay, that's just stupid to me. I mean, I shouldn't insult other people's beliefs, but from my perspective, that's irrational. Obviously, that's a metaphor, and yes, the Bible is full of metaphors. So now this brings us to for me, what's a fundamental question. When it says God made man out of the earth, out of a clump of dirt, you're saying that's metaphorical? What do you say?
Chapter 2, verse
27. Yeah. Here it's verse 7. Vayitzer Hashem Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama. And the Lord God made the man dust from the earth. So is that what's that?
Asiya.
Yeah. Oh.
I see it.
Well, no, it's Vayitzer there.
Yetzah. Yetzah, double yod. There's 2 yods in that, by the way.
Right.
Other than the Yetzah, when he forms the animal, is only 1 yod. There's a nice little drush on that, but okay.
All right. Well, and you can share that drush too, but I guess the non-literal interpretation, but So you're saying that's metaphorical. God didn't
No.
actually.
He formed. I formed. I think it depends what you mean by forming. I don't think he did it like a potter that he formed him. I think that's why I don't use the word evolution. Having discussed with it, the problem
Okay.
with evolution, it didn't need to have, but it's been built into it that the first stage in evolution is random mutations, random changes. The word random is the problem. So I say developed. That life did develop by
Mhm.
God twinkling, because I don't see how, anyway, in my understanding, that rocks and water and all the oil slimes or whatever, well, were no oil slimes, rocks and water, and that's what you have
So
turn into life.
is
No
this
way.
what could I call this? Could I call your approach guided evolution?
I call it guided development. Okay, guided
Right.
evolution. Yeah. Okay, if it's guided,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
All right.
yeah. I think
So in other words, what you're saying is in Genesis 2:7, and God formed man out of, or Adam, the man or humankind, dust from the earth. He did it through a process that took from from some sort of perspective millions of years. Is that
yeah, that's where it's formed. It's right, or so. It wasn't, but if it had said in God created, notice it doesn't say God created Adam from a bunch of. It's God formed. And yet, so those are process verbs. By process I mean stuff and time.
Tell us the drash, the non-literal interpretation of the second yud there. So the word
Oh, well,
vayitzer there is written with
okay.
two yuds.
Because look, when it says on God form the animals, it's spelled with a one. V'yatzar, it's spelled
Mhm.
with a one yud. It's a Hebrew letter. Yud. It's the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's the
Right.
beginning. Yeah. It sounds like yeah for the English speakers, and and the the when it says God formed, it's the animals. It's same sequence of word. God formed the animals. This, and this. God formed the atom. This. But the viatzar for the form is for animals is one yud.
Mhm.
And yud is the first letter of God's explicit name in Hebrew.
Hmm.
So they get one soul. Adam gets two yuds, gets a double soul. All life, all animal life has the first, it's the creation, which is God creates these animals. And that's the nephesh. All animals have a soul, a nephesh. It's a soul that's of life. It's the soul of life. I don't know how more to say that. And the other next, but we get a nephesh because we're part animal. And then verses go by, and then God creates the Adam. That's the second soul. So we have a nephesh and a neshama. The nephesh knows me, and I've got to survive. That's why animals' basic instinct is food, survival, and just stand. Even if you have a pet, I don't suggest doing that. But I mean, I had a friend of mine wanted to pet one of his favorite animals, a cat, or what he was eating. Well, that caught a bunch of stitches in his hand. Because although he'd been feeding this particular animal for a decade or so, he made the mistake of putting his hand near the animal's head and food. And that's the nephesh. It's all about me. And
Mhm.
there are people who are nephesh dicks, that they think the world is spinning. That's the great song. Let me tell you, babe, this world isn't spinning just for you alone. It's a great, wonderful song. The neshama takes the me, and it makes it like we or us. The neshama knows that there's a spiritual oneness that connects the whole world, that everything you do affects, the further it is from you, the less the effect, but has effect, it's universal. So the
Mhm.
neshama knows, the jargon I think would be the other. The neshama knows that you have to act in a way that's decent to other people. There, you see people that are nephesh people throw the garbage in the street, and they don't even care about it. I
Mhm.
have to walk in that street, so I'd have to walk by his garbage. Even
I want to summarize in maybe more English simple terms. There's there there's the way the word in Genesis 2:7 is spelled has what we would call maybe an extra yud, which isn't actually necessary for the spelling of the word, and that indicates that humans have both a maybe this life force and some kind of a soul, which animals don't have. Is that summarize basically what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Okay.
If any dog lover would know, dogs would say the dogs have a soul, but we have a higher soul.
Okay. All right. But all human beings, all Homo sapiens alive today, Because here we're in dangerous
Yes, I
territory.
agree with you before you even say it. They all
Okay.
have the neshama. They're all
Okay.
humans. They're all human.
Because for example, there are these what do they call, like Christian identity, which is kind of like this white supremacist movement, who say that, they're actually descended from different line, that Jews are physical descendants of. They have this weird theology that they're physically descended from Satan, who raped Eve and produced offspring, which was Cain, right? And so they want to say there are humans who don't have the same inherent. They're not made in the image of God in the way that others are, and that's where we get into really dangerous territory, I think.
I
Certainly from a Tanakh perspective, it's Torah. Okay.
I don't see the basis for that theologically. I mean, maybe they can try to read something into verses. They talk about trying to read that. I would not call that the golden apple. I would call it the rotten apple.
Well, so there's an old joke that it's not a joke. The Greek word for parshanut, for interpretation, is exegesis. Jesus is reading, Gesis, right? And X is from, and then there's eisegesis, which is you read into, right? It's not a joke. That's actually
I never
what
heard
the
that. Right?
terms. So what they're doing is eisegetical, right? They have a racist doctrine they're trying to justify, and they're grasping at straws in the biblical text to try to read something into it, which, you would never get that from the biblical text alone. But if you're trying to explain, okay, I know this person's inferior to me because I'm a racist bigot, how do
Yeah.
I explain that from the Bible? That's basically what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, this is kind of mind blowing. And look, Dr. Schroeder has many books he's written. We're going to put links on my website, nehemiaswell.com, where you
I
can
just say
click
one
and
thing about the Adam.
please.
There's no time now. There's no time. I won't say it.
No,
But
there's time. I think we have like another hour technically. So go ahead. There's as much time as you need. Go ahead.
yeah, that the Bible gives the ages of people. There's nothing super. Later, I'll get into something else if you remind me about a subtlety of why nothing superfluous in the Bible. But the Bible gives the ages of people. Now, why does the Bible break our heads? It's hard enough to study the Bible, let alone have to know that Adam lived 130 years till they had this third kid Seth, and Seth 105 years till we talk about that fall. In any event, why do we have to know these ages? Because they let us form a calendar. Otherwise, there'd be no 6,000-year calendar that people are concerned with. The only reason they have, because you add up all the ages in the Bible, they're all given, and you add kings and queens, and it comes to a number less than 6,000 years. Not the biblical, but you get to the end of the Hebrew Bible, and then you have to add kings, queens, and everyone else, or the Christians would add on Jesus, etc. And you get to less than 6,000 years. If the numbers hadn't been given, if the ages of people hadn't been given, there'd be no calculation, no problem. So the ages are given. And why was I getting onto this point? Sorry, I forgot. I was getting that for a reason.
You're talking about why is it that we're told the ages of the people? Because it gives us a calendar.
Yeah.
And so I think really the question for me from that is, I think, are you saying that from the time that Adam and Eve were given a neshama, a soul, that the world really is about 6,000 plus minus, right?
From the
give or
moment
take a couple hundred years,
exactly. Because then it says Adam lived 130 years, have a kid named Seth.
Yeah.
We're doing that on Earth, not in outer space. So that's it. From Adam on, it's an Earth-based calendar. Okay. Now,
Okay.
so we add up those years and we see how long ago Adam was. Then Barbara, my wife is Barbara Sofer. She writes every 2 weeks for the Jerusalem Post called The Human Spirit. It's really worth getting on her blog. Her pen name is Sofer. She has a blog just for you, the readers, I'm saying, she has a blog she has thousands of people from, but it's work. Every Friday, she puts out about a 20-line or 20-line or so on Facebook. I don't have Facebook, it's her Facebook. Sofer, her name is B. Sofer.
And you said this is who is this?
My wife.
Your wife. Okay, Barbara Sofer. We'll put a link on my website as well.
Okay, she's a pen name.
Okay.
Sofer means writer. In fact,
Right.
it was the name before we married, and her professional name remained. So she has a website, and every Friday she puts out a blog of about 15, 20 lines in which she spends hours on a summary of what we're reading in the Bible the next day in the synagogue. So if you want to go through the Hebrew, a summary in English, it's written in English. And then So what am I getting? Okay, leave that aside. So if we add up all the years going to, here's what I was getting at. Barbara and I are in London giving lectures back to back. She's a great speaker and a great writer. Mm-hmm. We have an afternoon off. We go to the British Museum, not the Science Museum, the British Museum in London. We walk in on the Mesopotamian wing now. It's a wing, a whole wing. Mm-hmm. And what do we see? A sign, the first cities, a whole section related to the first cities that are known in the world, not the first little towns, the first big cities. They date back to Nehemia, the time of Adam. National Geographic a half a year ago had something very similar. They date back, the year is given. They say such and such, approximately this and years ago, the first cities appear. I look at the number, I say, Barb, look at the number. Of course, they give it in BCE. Okay, they say BC. So you have to add 2,000 years onto that. It matches the Bible. I know that because I work with this stuff all the time. So it matches Adam. Mm-hmm. It matches Adam. I say literally, fully, thank God, the curator of this entire exhibit was, and I say it literally, thank God, because these people are busy all the time, and he was there to answer my question. I didn't mention Adam. I didn't mention Neshama. I didn't mention Bible. Nothing. Why did the cities form at this time? That was my question. You know what his answer was? We have no idea. We have no idea because it's strange, because the population explosion of humans starts thousands of years earlier when farming is invented. Farming is invented 11,000 years ago. We're talking about something like 6,000 years ago. There's thousands of years. Why didn't it? So he said, we have no idea why suddenly, and it's sudden. And you know what the answer is? He gives a year that's about 200 years after the biblical date, okay? And he gives, I think it's something, he gives it in BC, but you add the 2000. So what does it mean? I know what it means. The neshama, before the creation of the neshama, they were Homo sapiens all around, but they weren't humans. They were people. They had all the drives of an animal, but all the skills of a human: opposing thumb, intelligence to invent farming, how to trick this one to, they were animals, okay? The neshama comes into the world, and for the first time ever, you could have people of different clans that smell differently and had different folks and grand folks live together. You couldn't have a city before the neshama, because if you didn't look like me, talk like me, and come from my mishpacha, extended family, my chamula, if you're talking in the Middle East, I had you for dinner, either roasted or boiled. I mean, it was literally a dog-eat-dog world. The neshama changed the world, and for suddenly, people that weren't from the same family line, the Hebrew would be chamula or mishpacha, chamula, if could live together. You couldn't have a city before this. What's amazing at this time also, in fact, that's what the plaque says beside the timing. However, I'm just like seeing it in my head. However, the most important discovery of the time was the invention of
agriculture.
What did you say, poker?
No, I said agriculture.
No, that goes back 4,000 years.
Oh, okay. What was the most important discovery?
Writing.
Okay.
Now, why was writing invented? Because cities appeared. And what happens with cities? Now, Sam and his family lives in the city. Frank and his family live on the farm. All rainy season, all winter long, Sam in the city is weaving baskets, because and Frank on the farm is growing corn. Comes the spring, Sam in the city picks up his 50 big storage baskets, carries them out to Sam to Frank on the farm, and Sam in the city, so Frank on the farm, you need these baskets, they breathe, and you can store your corn until, you should have corn for the whole year till you get, there's no supermarkets now, and it won't get moldy. And Frank on the farm says, Sam, you're a gift from heaven. I really need those storage baskets. I'll give you 2 baskets full of corn for your family if you'll give me the other 48 baskets for me. And Frank and Sam from the city says, good deal. I'll trade you these for 2 big baskets for my family. Then Frank breaks the bad news. Sam, from the city, you came out 2 weeks too early. The corn won't be ripe for another 2 weeks. Don't break your back carrying the baskets back to town. Leave them here and write out. And that's why all the first writing is economic transactions. All the first writing is in Hallelujah, there's a God. All the first writing is Frank on the farm and Sam owes this in the city, owes this and that. Frank, writing is invented because of because of trading. Trading is invented because of division of labor. Division of labor is because Frank lives on the farm and Sam lives in the city, and they do separate stuff. And that all
so trade is the basis of civilization, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Of at least the writing part of civilization. So let me let me understand. So let's go back around 6,000 years. What is it? 5,780.
Yeah, 80. You have something about 6,000,
almost 6, 4, whatever. Around 6,000 years. So we have a human being. His name is Adam, and he has a wife named Chava. Are there other people who have souls at that time who aren't their physical descendants?
No, and that's what's I would say. Oh, I get you. I'm going to say 2 things about this. First, let me say what's on my mind, and then please do that again. What's interesting about the age that's given at the British Museum for the first cities is a few hundred years after the biblical age of Adam, which is exactly what would be needed, because the soul has to spread. The soul spreads biologically and, according to Rashi, sociologically also. Okay, but in other words, so I think to answer now your question, I think one couple gets the soul, and it spreads, also biologically and also sociologically. I mean, supposing you are soulless, okay, and you have your mom and dad, and you have kids, and they're soulless, but they see this family over there, and they got really something going for them. Look, they sing on Friday nights. I mean, they just seem to have a better life. Junior, why don't you go play with those kids? Maybe you pick something up from them. And Junior picks up the neshama because if Rashi's correct, the commentator Rashi from the year 1190 approximate, that 1090 from the year 1090 approximate, that 1050, I beg your pardon, Rashi 1050, that says we see one particular place where it implies that if a souled person, an ensouled person, raises another child that wasn't from souled parents, that child will have a neshama also. In other words, the neshama is able to be instilled sociologically as well as biologically. Okay.
So at the time of Adam and Chava, which you take to be Adam and Eve, you take to be literal people, if I understand correctly.
I think so.
There may have been thousands of people in the world, tens of thousands maybe. Not every one of them was given a neshama, but by a couple hundred years later or something, that soul had spread to every human being. Is that?
I don't know if to every human being, but it certainly had spread enough so you could start having cities. Notice there were only cities in the Middle East. There were only cities in the Fertile Crescent. There weren't cities over in China yet. The soul hadn't spread. It doesn't mean that the Chinese are inferior because they hadn't. No one had souls in those days. It was only this one little, and it spread.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned China. So when I lived in China for a year, and I was a high school teacher there, and my students used to tell me that what they were taught is that every human today is descended from an they said a monkey, but they meant an ape, right? And they said, we're descended from a different monkey than you're descended from. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, they found fossils, Australopithecus robustus. They found, used to be called Peking man, and Chinese people are descended from that. I don't even think it was a hominid. Australopithecus, right? Didn't walk up anyway. And then we're descended from something else, right? So that's what they were taught. I don't think mainstream anthropologists or physical anthropologists accept that. I think that might have been just what their ignorant teacher taught them. But you're saying that, or are you saying that not every human being today is a physical descendant of Adam and Eve? Some are descended from people who were The idea of an neshama was transmitted to them. A soul was given to them
I know I never thought of it that way,
sociologically.
but I would say yes, they still have the same neshama, because when
Yeah.
neshama comes to the world and it bifurcates, it spreads. And again, and the commentary of Rashi said about how you can get it biologically. It says these are the children. Oh, I'm sorry, of Moses. I don't have the exact, but then it mentions Aaron's children also. Okay, I don't remember the verse, but I remember the context of it. And and it's because those children had been raised and influenced by Moses. I guess that's what the point being, that's how they could be called children of Moses, even though they were children of Aaron. It happens in the book of
So,
Esther
so in
also.
the Andaman Islands, there's a famous island called North Sentinel Island, which, according to mainstream, I don't know, anthropologists, scientists, has been cut off from the rest of civilization, from the rest of humankind for tens of thousands of years. They call it like the last uncontacted tribe. Um, and there's a question about whether they've actually gone through like whether they actually have fire on this island. And, it's like 500 people or something like that. We don't actually know if it's 50 or 500 people. So they were never really in contact. I'm just trying to think. It's a thought experiment, right?
You
So the
have
people in the North Sentinel Island, there was a Christian a few years ago who said, "These are the last people who have never heard the good news of Jesus." And he went to give it, he went to, what they call share the gospel with them, and they killed him,
they
right?
killed
Because
me.
they
They
killed him
killed.
because they've had bad experiences with people coming in the past and
Oh,
kidnapping. So I think it was the British government or the Indian government kidnapped like 10 or 20 of them to try to bring
good.
them back and teach them the language and then, teach them our languages and so we could communicate with them. And then they ended up dying of disease. So they have bad experiences with strangers coming in and kidnapping them. But the people who are there who don't have virtually they have no knowledge of the outside world except the boats they see go by and the planes maybe they see fly over,
Yeah.
right? There's never so do they have a neshama? And you don't have to answer. It's just kind of a thought experiment here. So a young Earth creationist would say, let's get to the flood. A young Earth creationist would say everyone on the North Sentinel Island is a descendant of Noah, a
Yeah.
physical descent of Noah and his children.